All right, I think we might be live. I'm just going to check that on my phone here. Just a moment. Yes, indeed, we are live. Well, welcome to another weekly analytics office hours. Every Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern, we get together and I answer your questions that you leave in the chat. I wish we could see your video. I wish I could hear your voice, but this is our setup, and you just put your question in the chat and I address it. So we're looking for analytics and data science technical questions. Maybe you're running into an issue troubleshooting something in Excel or Power BI, Python, SQL, even other analytics tools as well. Whatever it is, I want to try to help you. Or you might have some questions around analytics soft skills, like communication or project management or leadership, maybe stakeholder management, all kinds of analytics soft skills that we can talk about as well. Even things like, I guess, the intersection of technical and soft skills too, such as how do you master attention to detail? How do you make sure your work is accurate every time? So we can answer any of those questions at all. Whatever is top of mind for you, this hour is for you. And if you have any questions about how to build your analytics career, whether it's getting into an analytics career for the first time, or perhaps you're already in an analytics career and you're looking to go from an analyst to a senior analyst, or a junior data scientist to a data science role, or perhaps you're trying to break into management. Let's talk about that. Just let me know what's top of mind for you, and that's what we're going to talk about in this session. Now, as I mentioned in the previous sessions, be sure to not include any sensitive information that you wouldn't want shared with the rest of the world. These sessions do get posted on YouTube, so that goes for anything personal that you wouldn't want to have shared, or maybe something about your company. Don't include any company-specific information as well. But if you're facing a problem, keep it really high level. Again, something you wouldn't mind posting online, and post your question in the chat, and we'll try to work through it. I've got several analytics tools ready to go here. Got a few sample data sets that we can use to hopefully walk through your use case. So we're ready to answer your questions. And looks like Tiffany has our first question today. Thank you, Tiffany. Could you go over how you would split up this column in Power BI into multiple columns at each period? This would be if it came through from a SQL server as veggie, broccoli, Brazil. Very nice. And hello, Tiffany. I appreciate you joining today. Great question. So we have something, and you're talking about bringing it over through SQL Server, and really, when you look at a field like that, we might call it a delimited field. In this case, sometimes you hear about comma-separated files, or in that case, the delimiter is comma. In this case, your delimiter is a period, and you can have pipes used as delimiters in some cases, but you want to basically split that up. So that's a great question. Now, if it's in SQL, if it's in SQL Server already, my preference for everything except for aggregation, if you're going to do aggregation in Power BI, you've got to set those up as measures. That's what measures are intended to do, is perform aggregation in Power BI. So if it's something at the column level, like this would be, splitting out a column, I would personally, especially if I'm bringing it in via SQL, I would split that out and do all of the data manipulation possible, again, outside of aggregations. You don't want to do aggregations in SQL directly, because in Power BI you're going to be applying filters and everything, and so if you're doing the aggregations already, you're going to end up taking averages of averages potentially. But everything else, especially this type of row level manipulation, creating a column at the row level, adding additional rows or manipulating columns, I would do that in SQL. Part of it's probably that I'm just very comfortable with SQL. I've been using it for 13 years. I've been using Power BI for about 7 years. But the other, I think in general, SQL is just a staple when it comes to analytics manipulation, data manipulation. So I try to do as much in SQL as possible. So maybe my follow-up question is are you okay if we go ahead and break out that column using SQL, or there probably is a way to do it in Power BI as well. So we could go either route, but would you be okay if we just updated the SQL query that you would use to bring it into Power BI so that directly when you bring it into Power BI, it's already set up where it's split out? Or do you want to see it really all the data manipulation done using like Power BI DAX language? Okay, yeah. Again, that's what I would do is do it in SQL, get your data set just perfect. By the time you plug it into Power BI, you're pretty much just dragging fields over and setting up visuals at that point. Again, measures too, because the aggregation's got to be done in Power BI to avoid like averages of averages, to make sure it's a weighted average. Perfect. Okay, so what we're going to do for this use case is I am going to go ahead and set up a quick table. So I'm going to open up SQL Server here. And we'll head over to SQL Server in just a moment here. I'm going to set up a database, just a quick data table here that would have a column that would have something like veggie, broccoli, Brazil. Good example. There we go. We're back. We're in SQL here. Now I've got some sample files that I'm going to use to start off with, and just this applies to SQL. This applies to Python. It can even apply to Power BI, where you create a template file or template code that you use on a regular basis. Maybe it's really hard to memorize all the syntax for something. If you use it enough, you might start to memorize some of the things, and that's good. It can maybe ramp up your efficiency when you don't have to refer back to other files. But there's so much code to learn out there. There's so much syntax to learn. It's helpful to, when you've got something that works for creating a data table, for instance, like save a library of that in it could be in Excel and have a tab for each data manipulation, or maybe just a Word notepad file, and it's in a directory and you've got it labeled, here's my code for creating a table, here's my code for writing a select statement. And that can, again, apply to SQL, it could apply to Python code, different Python data manipulations, other coding languages, and even Power BI. If you've come up with a nice looking template that has the data table, the formatting done the way that you want to do that, and you want to keep a consistent look and feel across dashboards, which is often desired by management, you might create a starting template that maybe has a few filters, placeholder filters, table, and then that's what you're starting with every time you create a dashboard. Of course, the first thing you're going to do is bring in your data and for that particular use case, for that particular dashboard, but you've already got visuals, maybe some if you have a company logo that you always want to include, some filters, you've already kind of got some structure around it. Even like the color template, the color palette, all of that's set up in there, and you're always starting with a copy of that Power BI template. These are just ways to ramp up your efficiency so you're not having to search for code again that you've used in the past, or start from scratch when you're creating a new Power BI dashboard and do all that formatting again manually. You're creating reusable assets essentially. All right. So all that to say, I'm going to start with one of my recent files here. This is from one of my trainings. I'll use the lag and lead illustration. I'm just going to use this for a template of setting up a table here. So we've got to start by having a table like this, and then we can do the data manipulation from there. So I'll go to New Query here, and I've already got a database here that I've called Value Driven Analytics. I'll probably use that one for now. I'm going to creating a database is very simple. So I've already set this up, set up a SQL connection. So if I disconnect from this, this is a very simple SQL server. It's just based on my desktop. So I've connected to the SQL Server here. I'm in SQL Server Management Studio. This whole SQL Server Management Studio is free to download, and it was free to set up this server on my local computer. So I'm able to write SQL queries and create create data tables and everything you do at a company pretty much, but it is local to my machine. So I'm creating the database, value-driven analytics. I'm going to use it. I'm going to create a schema, which is a folder, but basically a folder of tables within a database. So each database, the thing about it is levels of organization. You can see you can have multiple databases within SQL Server, and then within each database, you can have multiple schemas, just kind of like, again, a folder of tables. And then within each schema, you can have different tables. So there's lots of levels of organization, which is nice. So I'm going to go ahead and copy all of this code for our use case. And we'll call this delimited illustration. Keep it all caps here. I don't know if I spelled that right, but that'll work. So we're going to create that schema, and then we're going to we don't really need to drop it since it won't have already existed, but if we ever wanted to recreate this, I've got this where this would not error out, even if it exists, because it says drop table if it exists. If it doesn't exist, it'll just ignore it. So that's kind of nice about adding this if exists to a drop table statement. So within the value-driven analytics database, within the delimited illustration schema, we're going to create a table. And we'll call this table vegetable country. So we will create that table. So in SQL, we need to start by creating a table and giving it some structure. Now the looks like we really only need one column in this case, so we'll keep it simple and say, it really has a lot of data in it. So we'll call this, I guess it has the vegetable and the country, so we'll call it vegetable country, and it'll be an nvarchar with 50 characters. It looks like that should be enough. Maybe I'll just do this 100 just in case. So it'll just be 1, and we will update this with just one record in this case for our example. Update the table here and the columns that are in it. We just have, again, one column here. So what happens here is this is just creating a schema here. So, and this is already existing, so I don't need to create the database value-driven analytics again. And, okay, so it already created this in the previous step. If I run this, the table doesn't exist right now. It'll just say it completed successfully. But here's where we actually create the structure of the table. We're not putting any data into it at this point. So now, at this point, the table exists, and I could do a select star from it. Just one of the most simple SQL statements we can write. And it doesn't have any data in it, but it does have a column, vegetable country. So now we will insert some data into that. And so, Tiffany, we're going to use your example. Veggie, broccoli, Brazil. Great example there. And this is how we insert rows. You saw before, here's another illustration. Each one of these would be a row. In this case, this table had 3 columns: customer, marketing, channel, and interaction date. In this case, we're just putting one column that we're calling vegetable country and one row, just this particular one that says veggie, broccoli, Brazil. So after I insert some data into it, now most of the time you're going to be either like using an ETL tool to feed the data into SQL Server. That's mainly what a business intelligence team would be doing. But you could also upload a specific flat file, a CSV, an Excel file, into SQL Server, bring in however many records are in that file. Most of the time you wouldn't be updating it manually like this, where you're manually, again, look at this illustration, manually updating these 7 or so records. You'd be uploading a file of those. But this allows us to do a quick example. And so now let's take a look at our data set. We should have one row. There's our row. Okay, so now we're ready to, it took all of that to do the task. Oh boy. Hey Daniel, thanks for joining. I'm just, thanks for joining. We're going through a use case, so Daniel, if you've got a use case as well, it'll be on deck. What we're going to do here now, we've got this field, and I like to continue selecting the field in question. In this case, we only have one column, so we'll just do select star and bring that back as well. But what we want to do is parse this out. It sounds like Tiffany, and let me know if I'm wrong. We want to parse this out into multiple columns. Now, whenever you're performing a task, you want to think about all the possible scenarios. So it's hopefully we have clean data, and all of the additional rows in this column would have just 3 values that were separated by periods. So you'd always have 2 periods within your column. But it's possible that you might have some that are completely blank and some that have 1 period, just 2 values and so forth. So you want to think about what would I do in that scenario if I did run into an issue like that where there weren't 2 periods. And so we might say, well, take the first value until you reach a period and put that into column 1. And then if after that, till the next period, put that into column 2, and then after that, put the remainder of the string into column 3. That way, no matter what use case we run into, we've got a plan for it. Now, of course, if you've got a scenario where there's missing data, it would be missing for that column, but at least we've planned for all those possible scenarios. So let's say that's how you want to lay it out here. The first thing we would do is create that column 1. So we're going to create 3 columns, again, for the first one that starts with character 1 until we find a period, and then this middle one, and then this third one. And I guess veggie, broccoli, so it's almost like category. I probably shouldn't have called this vegetable, maybe maybe food country or something like that. Veggie, so it's like food category, item, or food item, and then country. So we'll call this first one food category. Now again, a lot of people like to use underscores. I actually prefer to use quotes, or you can use brackets around it so that you can include spaces, and I can kind of have this already formatted, so by the time I import it into Power BI, I don't have to rename variables. I just find that to be cleaner. And one potential ramification of that is if you needed to take that query and put it in another platform, maybe you wanted to create a data science model on this and bring it over to Python. This is another reason to do as much data manipulation as SQL as possible, or if you were to transition to another dashboarding platform in the future, all your work in SQL it's already done in SQL. You just take that SQL and copy it over, versus if you're doing all your data manipulation in Power BI and DAX, now if you ever wanted to take it out of that, you've got to recreate all that Power BI data manipulation you've done. Most analytics tools have a way of writing SQL. Almost every single analytics tool has a way of using SQL. So this is a versatile syntax language that can be used across tools. So the more you do your data manipulation in SQL, the more reusable, just plug and play, copy and paste into when you need to use other analytics tools, versus being locked in to Power BI. Power BI is a great tool, but again, you might want to create a data science model in Python for it, or use another tool at some point. And the more you do in SQL, the easier it is going to be to migrate and reuse that. So another good reason to do this data manipulation in SQL. Okay, so we're going to start with this one. Now, for the beginning here, I'm going to use I'll use the find function. I believe it's called find. And so we'll refer to our column. We don't need to use quotes around it unless it has a space in it or a special character, so this should work just fine. I have not used this function in a while, but we're going to figure this one out. And then I'm just going to call this food category, but what it should return is the position of where we find the period within this particular column. So let's see if this works. It looks like I might need to use a different function here. Index. Yeah, we'll try this one for now. Okay, so this is a good use case for just, again, this is one that I haven't used in a while. I'm just going to do a quick web search on it, and it's this should be very easy to look up. So here's how, really when you think about analytics, being able to do a quick web search and know what to search for and how to find what you're looking for quickly in the search results is a really good skill. So I'm going to do a search here. I'm going to look for how to find a particular position of a character in a field, and I'm going to search. There's different versions of SQL, so I'm using SQL Server, so I'm going to say in SQL Server. If I was using Snowflake, I'd say in Snowflake. CHARINDEX, and I think I might know the syntax from here, so I'm just going to go with this, but of course it's going to take in a certain number of arguments, and it actually tells me this if I hover over it. It says search expression, which is going to be vegetable country, that's the variable we want to search, and then it says expression to be searched, which would be the period, and then starting location, which I believe is optional, and so by default it'll start at the beginning of the string, but if I wanted to say, well, we'll start your search at this particular position, position 2, which would be the E, position 3, which would be the G, and so forth. So I think the default is 1, so we should be okay here. I'm going to run this and see what it returns. Okay, so it's returned a 0 there. Now I'm wondering, it says it hasn't found a period here. It returns a 0 if it doesn't find it. So I'm going to reverse this and see if maybe I just need to do, okay, look for this within the vegetable country. And if this doesn't work, we'll go back to doing a search. That looks good. So I'm iterating, I'm testing, I'm checking my work. I'm making sure 7, is that right? Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, position 7. Now obviously this is not returning the food category. It returns the position of the first period. But I need this for the next item. This is one I'm very familiar with, the substring function. So the substring function, we're going to end up doing some nesting of functions here using 2 different functions together. The substring function takes a particular field, vegetable country, and then you feed it what position do you want to start with? Well, this is going to be the very first character we said. So regardless of whether there's a period or not, we're going to start with position number 1, and then we're going to go to wherever we find that first period. And that is going to be fed to us using this CHARINDEX function. We're going to copy what we just did that returns 7 in this case, the 7th period. That's how many characters we want you to go, -1, because we don't want to include the period. So technically it'll go through position 1 through position 6 of the vegetable country field, and it'll return position 1 through position 6. And so this should really finally give us the first field, food category here. Look at that. That looks pretty good to me. Veggie, we've got it. All right, now the next one's probably going to be a little bit more tricky. And I guess one thing we might want to think about here is what happens if it never finds a period? What happens in that case? And maybe we'll add another field here just to find out. We'll do a few values here. Maybe we have a, let me just check the syntax. Okay, so we want this to look like that. We'll have another one that's maybe null. We'll have another one that is just blank. I'm trying to test out all kinds of different scenarios here. We'll do another one that's just one that's veggie broccoli without Brazil, one that's just veggie. We are going to test out all kinds of scenarios here. Now I might recreate this table altogether here. So I'm going to start from the drop table if exists, and again, it's this is why we have the drop table if exists. That line's not going to error out, even if we hadn't created the table yet. So there we go. I just ran that. I think it worked. I'm going to run this select statement now. Oh, okay, so now it errors out. So let's do a select star from this table. This is why we need to account for different scenarios, because one of these scenarios has caused the query that did work on the perfect row that had the 2 periods. Now this query doesn't work anymore because we have some exceptions. We've got a null value, we've got a blank value, we've got veggie broccoli, and so forth. So let's just, what I'm going to do here, and this is a very good troubleshooting technique, is I'm going to pull out just a specific part of this variable. We're nesting things, but we need to kind of break this down now to figure out why this isn't working anymore. So we're going to call this just maybe char index. I'm going to comment this out. It's very good to be able to comment things out quickly. You can see returned a char index of 7 here, which is good. A char index of null when the variable is null, or it'll be a 0 if it can't find a period, like it does if it's a blank character, or if it's just veggie. And then veggie broccoli here returns a 7 as well. So you can see, this is really neat to be able to see a variety of how char index works for different values. That's a good starting point. What this means is when we finally create this variable, we need to create a case when statement. We'll say case when the char index is null, or I'll say char index equals 0. Either one of these scenarios, this case where it's null or where it doesn't even find a period, we're just going to return the value itself for this first column at least. So we'll say then vegetable country. But if it's not, if the char index returns a number that's not null and it's greater than 0, like these two rows would, because there's a period in that string, it finds that delimiter we're looking for, then we'll do our regular substring here, and that is food country, is food category. Let's try this. Oh boy, there we go. So we got an error when we didn't account for that. But now our case when statement says, okay, you know, if vegetable country was null, we're going to return null for food category. We don't have any information. If it's not null though, we're going to return the first value. So in this case it's blank, and in this case it's veggie, and so forth. So we need to account for these cases where it doesn't fit into our expectation. It's good to anticipate that in advance. All right, so now we're on to the next one. And so we can use this substring aspect of it again, but this time we want to start with the first period that we find. And we actually have that right here, this char index. Now technically we want to start, when we do our substring, our next substring, we're going to start with this plus 1. So that'll be our starting point. So I'm just going to take this and we'll say this plus 1, where we find that first period. That is going to be our beginning character for our second column, which we're going to call food item, in this case broccoli. Now we need to tell substring the ending character as well. So we'll be able to use, what we can do is use this char index. This is where it gets kind of complicated. We're going to find a period, but we don't want it to start with position 0. We want it to start with the last period, which could be in any character depending on the row that we're on. So remember, there's a third argument that's optional. It'll start with starting at the beginning of the string, basically character 1. But in this case, we're going to say, I want you to start with the place where you found the first period. So we're going to nest char index within char index. Again, we're saying find a period in this column and start with the place where you found the first period. Let's see how this does. Okay, as ending character. Okay, I think what I need to do here is I believe it's just starting from that first character and it says, oh, I found it in that character. I need to do period, the place where you found that first period plus 1. So this is why we're doing this iteratively to check our work. There we go. Okay, so the only field that has an extra period, that has 2 periods, a second period, is this first one, and so it returns character 16. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Good. And then notice, even for the veggie.broccoli, it's returning an ending character of 0 because it doesn't find another period. It's saying find a period starting in, this ends up being position 8 because it says find the first period, okay, position 7 plus 1, so start with the B, look for a period, it doesn't find it, it returns 0. Okay, so I think we've got everything we need now to finally create our second field. And we're going to have to do a case when for when it doesn't find a second period. We need to account for that. So I'm just going to start with, again, I like to copy and paste code and start with something similar and then adapt it for our particular use case. So in this use case, we are going to want to look for where, let me see here, where char index is null or char index is 0. Really, I think what we want to do here is find where this period, where it doesn't find a period or it's null. Right. So this represents where it never even found a single period. In this case, I think we need to just go ahead and call this null. Like, we don't have a second argument here. For this null, we don't have a value. For this one, this blank, we don't have a value. Even for veggie, we don't have a value for your item. All we have is you didn't feed us another period. So at this point, it would certainly be null if we can't find a period at all. Now, the next use case would be when the end string here is null. We don't have an ending character. What do we do in that case? I think it's going to be different than if we do have 2 periods like we do in this first row. So if this equals, it won't be null because that would be captured by this first line, but this could be 0. In fact, it is 0 for this use case in particular. It had a beginning character, it had 1 period, but it doesn't have a second period. So that's what we're dealing with in this second when statement. And we're saying if you can't find a second period, which would be returned here, so if this basically ends up being 0, then what we want you to do is return, and this is where we would, yeah, probably, I'm going to start with this substring, or I'll just type it from scratch. Then I want you to return substring of vegetable country. Your starting position is going to be where you found where you found that first period. We're going to start with that position. You don't want to include the period in that field, I wouldn't think. So we'll add 1 to it, start with 1 position after the first period. And then in this case, how many characters out do you go? I'm just going to use a really large number. We've set it up as a bar chart with 100 characters, so it won't be any more than 100. So I'm just going to say go out 100 characters. You can go out that far if there's that many. So starting position, and then how many characters do you want to go out? And I think I might have said something confusing earlier. This substring, it says starting with this position and then go out this number of characters. So it's not really the go out to this position. It's starting with position 1, like the V in this row, for instance, go out this many characters. And so in this case, if it's a case like this where there was veggie.broccoli and then there wasn't a period after it, we would want it to just go on. There's not going to be a period in this case that tells us where to stop, and so we want it to just keep going, and so that's what the 100 accomplishes here. So we'll say just start with the first position of the first period, one character after that, and then go out as far as you need to, basically. Using 100, I could use 1,000 or something where we'd say, that's a pretty safe number. It's not going to get cut off. So we've handled that scenario. Let's handle this scenario where it is it's kind of like what we expect. It's got the 2 periods in it. And so that'll be our else statement here. Else, and we're going to do another substring, but this time, well, similar to the previous case here, we're going to start our string with where we found the first period plus 1. So we're starting with the character after the period, in this case the B here. This time we need to tell it to stop when we get to that next period. Okay, so how do we get that? How do we figure out how many characters to go? Again, what we're really telling it in this third argument of substring is not where to stop the substring, but how many characters to go from there. So the answer to that question, how many characters do we need to go, it's basically the difference between this second period, which we were able to capture right here, this ending character. We did all that nesting to get that number here, minus where you have the first period, which is captured here. So it's going to be a little complicated, but basically we think that's good from a parentheses perspective. Now this, we've got, I'm just going to start with just taking this value, so position of the first period minus position of the second period, and that's going to be how many characters it needs to go out. May need to adjust it by 1 or so. So this difference will be the third argument of our substring here. It tells us how many characters we need to go out until we get to the next period. All right, I'm going to paste that there. Oh boy. Getting a little bit messy here. There we go. That looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. So, well, nope. It looks like we need to probably subtract 1 from the substring. We're capturing that period. So I'm going to go to the very end of this. Add a -1 here. So it's getting the position of this period, the position of this period, subtracting them, and then it needs to subtract 1 as well to avoid getting that extra period there. Let's just check on that. That's good. Broccoli and broccoli. And notice everything else here is null. We didn't find a second period, so we can't tell you what it is for the null, the blank, the veggie. We don't have a second record here. Great. Well, now let's create that third column, the country column. And I believe that we can start with something like this. And we'll say, okay, again, if we weren't able to find a period at all, it'll be this third field is going to be called, it's going to be null. To rename these, so this will be our food item, the last field we created, and then this will be country. There we go. Alright, so it'll be null. If this is, and when it can't find that second period, then this third argument would also be null in this case. So I'm going to say null there. Otherwise, we want to do what we kind of did in the second when statement from our previous column, the food item field. We want to say, okay, just go to the vegetable country. I want you to find, in this case, it's this nested char index here. So remember where we did char index, find that period, but start with the position after the first period. We don't need the subtraction here. Okay, substring in vegetable country, start with the second period you find. Okay, we're going to need to add, sometimes I'll remove a open parentheses and add it back so that I can kind of make sure. It's very, very important to keep track of your parentheses so I can see, it'll highlight which open parentheses it corresponds to. But I'm going to add 1 to it now, and so this will start at the position after the second period. And then similar to what we did here, again, the second when statement for the food item here, I'm just going to tell it to go out 100 characters, something very large, something that's safe here. And then that'll be our country field. So that one was a little bit easier to handle. Okay, we're going to try this. Wow, there we go. Veggie, broccoli, Brazil. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. So, all null, if the field is null, all 3 values are null. If it's just a blank, technically there is an item there, so it'll be food category will be blank, and then the rest would be null because there weren't any periods. Similar with veggie, if veggie's there, veggie would be your first item, and then the rest would be null. Veggie.broccoli, so if there's only 1 period, it'll capture the first 2 items, and then the third item would be null. You didn't feed us a third period. We don't know what to put after that. And then if it's in there like we kind of expect it to be, it successfully parses it out. Veggie, broccoli, Brazil. So we've done it all in SQL. So you would take the SQL query. This would be what you import into Power BI. Everything's already set up and ready to go. And again, if you did all this in DAX, Power BI, you probably could do this in DAX as well. You would, if you ever wanted to take this and use it for a data science model, maybe you wanted to use these individual fields, food category, food item, and country to predict something, well, now you've got to redo all of that, right? in Python, versus you could just now take this SQL query, port it over to Python, you've already got everything split out. So yeah, I highly recommend doing as much as possible in SQL like we did today. Now it's ready to go. I try to post this in, if it's helpful, I'll try to post this code in the chat here. It does not allow that many characters in the chat. But Tiffany, if you like the code here, I can email that to you if it's helpful. Was that helpful, Tiffany? Is that kind of what you were looking for? Again, it's ready to go. Could have done it in DAX, but we've got everything ready here in SQL, parsed out into 3 different fields. Well, that was a great question. A lot of fun. We explored a lot of concepts along the way, some troubleshooting, how to search for fields. We talked about saving fields, so this might be something, one of those pieces of code that you save in an Excel document in a tab and say, parsing out columns, and now you've got that saved. Absolutely. This is some of the most complicated SQL. Like this, there's of course more complicated steps that you can do as well when it comes to ranking and joining tables in creative ways. But we've done a lot of nesting here using some advanced, at least intermediate level functions. But here's the key. And so tools are great, but really what we're doing is we're using a tool, a very flexible tool in SQL, but it allowed us to come up with an approach, nesting, and okay, we need to do this first, and then this first, and this. It's almost like a process, and it allowed us to execute that process. So that's where the creativity comes in. I have this, it's not even really a business challenge at this point. It's kind of you would have started with a business challenge and say, I need to get a data set that looks like this is going to be my methodology, and in order to execute on that methodology, I need to create this data set. In order to create this data set, here's my strategy to parse it out. I guess you could consider this to be data engineering, and creating feature variables based on another variable. Of course, it's nice if you just have access to a data set that's pretty clean, and hopefully it would have already parsed those out for you. But yeah, you don't all, data's not always clean like that. Well, what other questions do you have? Any other questions for today? Again, got a prepared topic. One we started to look at last time, analytics maturity transformation assessment, and wanted to walk through that and just talk through some analytics and data science maturity concepts as we go through that. What are some things that hold companies back from doing analytics better, essentially? Well, let me know if anyone has any questions. All right, feel free to post them, and we will switch to your questions if you have anything. But we have a little bit of time here, so I will go to our analytics maturity assessment on the Value Driven Analytics website. This is a quiz that anybody can take for free. In fact, there's a lot of analytics consultants out there that would charge maybe a few $1,000s to perform this assessment, maybe more in some cases. But I've created this quiz, make it available for free. It's the very first, I feel like this is a very valuable thing, and so I've made it the main thing on the website. Take the Analytics Maturity Transformation Assessment, and as you can see, it'll give you a score from 1 to 3 on how mature your organization is. 1 if you're really doing things manually and not very mature, not doing much value-driven analytics, and a 3 if you're really, really advanced, latest and greatest technology, doing it in an efficient way. And it'll break it out by category so you know where you're doing well and where you might want to focus. And then, of course, we don't want to just leave you there. Based on your answers to this quiz, we give you a customized PDF that'll give you recommendations on how to get better in some of the areas where, based on how you answered each question, it looks like there could be some opportunities. We're going to give you some recommendations. So I highly recommend taking it. So if you wanted to take it, you just go to the main Value Driven Analytics website here. It's going to bring you to this page, tell you a little bit about the quiz. It should take about 10 minutes. And then you just go through these 34 questions and answer it. So we talked a little bit about this first one already, how business strategy decisions are typically made. Of course, we recommend making data-driven decisions, using A/B testing, and then rolling out the one that did best. Testing things before rolling it out. Don't just go with gut instinct. That is our recommendations. A lot of companies say they want to make data-driven decisions. I don't think I've ever heard a company say they wanted to make decisions based on gut instinct. Every company wants to make data-driven decisions, but so often they don't actually do that. When push comes to shove, it's made in a manual way, again based on past experience or instinct, or what tends to happen more often than not, people know they need to bring data, and so they'll kind of ask questions like, can you give me some data for this, and just some data, right? And it doesn't really answer the business question in a robust way of, should we be doing this? Is this cost effective? Is this the best route to go? It's more of, here's some data about this category. Now my presentation has data, and so you can trust me to move forward with it. That's not really data-driven decision making. That's kind of like you've got an idea and you just are looking for some data to support it, to make it look like it's a data-driven decision. So it's got to be a robust, test it with maybe 20% randomly selected population before going live with it, see if it performs better than the control group. Sometimes you have to get creative with that. Depending on what the thing is that you're looking at, it may not seem very feasible to do an A/B test, and there's probably some cases where it's not, but you might be able to get creative and actually set one up beyond what appears to be possible at the surface level. And that's something that we can, of course, help with, seeing if there's a way to do an A/B test for a particular project. But there's other ways of also assessing projects beyond A/B testing when it's not feasible. But A/B testing, if you can pull it off, is the best way to figure out the impact an initiative is having. Then you can compare that to the cost and figure out if it's a positive ROI or not. And if you do that with every decision that a company makes, you're going to make some good decisions, and it should result in more profitability. You stop wasting money on projects that aren't driving value, and you're constantly assessing and making sure you're actually investing in valuable projects. That is a great way to make decisions. Okay, number 2 question here. How actionable is the typical dashboard or analysis that an analyst is putting together? Is it clear what next steps should be taken? Executives want this, obviously, and analysts, sometimes we can get caught up. Sometimes it's actually just the request given to us is, I want you to look at this, and you think about that, and if you just say, yeah, sure, let's do that, it may not actually be an actionable thing. You almost want to kind of ask, okay, what different actions might we take depending on the result of this analysis or dashboard? And if the answer is, well, we probably wouldn't do anything differently, but it's just we're kind of curious, it'd be an interesting stat to have, there might be better, more valuable ways to spend that analyst time. So keep that in mind. And I think that's a good conversation. I think stakeholders appreciate an analyst who will keep you honest, right, and make sure you're prioritizing the right things. And if that's not going to be actionable, then what kind of projects are there that would change a decision? Now, here's where it's kind of important for the analyst to take action. And when you're doing an analysis, keep in mind, how are we going to actually use this? When you're presenting your data, so often we as analysts, we're very proud of the methodology we create. We put a lot of focus on that. And then we never really get much into the insights that we found, or don't spend as much time there. And we may not even include at all any recommendations based on our analysis. But stakeholders, especially non-technical stakeholders, really any stakeholder, they want to know, okay, what should I do next? What's the purpose of this? So focus on the recommended actions. That's the number one thing. Maybe some interesting insights. Spend very little time on the methodology. Stakeholders generally trust you as an analyst, unless you do something to lose that trust, right? You're not validating your work. We have some trainings out there on mastering attention to detail, a lot of techniques you can apply to significantly lower the risk of errors. Nobody's perfect, but if you take several steps to check your work, you can preserve that trust that most stakeholders naturally have. You're the one who brings the data. As an analyst, that's one of the benefits of being an analyst. You kind of have this default level of trust with most executives and stakeholders till you lose that trust by sending out some bad data that wasn't checked, or maybe an analysis that's not based on a robust methodology. So it's important to preserve that trust, but realize that if you do have that trust, you don't need to spend a lot of time on the methodology. Now, if you work on your communication skills, maybe illustrate things in a very visual way. A lot of people are visual learners. You might be able to explain your methodology, even for technical models, in a way that's very, very high level. And it uses a metaphor or a visual where the stakeholder, non-technical stakeholder, they walk away and think, wow, I've never understood how these technical regression models work, but you just explained this to me in about a minute at a very high level, and I think I kind of get it. You're looking for correlations between this variable and whether a customer buys or not. Okay, yeah, and then these are the insights that you found. That's where you spend some time, more time on that. Like, yeah, we find that customers that have just moved, are more likely to purchase this. And then you get to spend a lot of time on the recommended actions. Okay, so we created this model. We're going to use this to figure out who we market to. And we've got this predicted value of a marketing touch point now. And so we're going to use that and compare it to the cost. And anytime the value is higher than the cost, or more than 100% ROI, we're gonna make a bid on that and try to market to that customer. So you're spending more time on the actions, the recommended action part. That's what most stakeholders want to see. They don't want to see and analysts spend a lot of time on just talking about the methodology, especially getting too technical. It's one of the worst things you can do in a presentation. So keep that in mind. I hope that's helpful. All right, we'll go through one more, and then we'll maybe come back to this next week if there are any other questions. How often do executives and other stakeholders get confused during presentations given by analysts? And, of course, that's not a good thing if they're confused. This really kind of goes back to the previous one of if you're in the sense of you need to stay on the right level of detail. You need to keep it high level. Unless you're doing a deep dive peer review with another technical, maybe a team member or a member of another team, you really want to keep your presentation from being too technical. And if you focus on the insights and you focus on the recommendations, your stakeholders, they should be able to come away with some good takeaways. The more brief you can be in your communication, that also helps. The longer you go on about something, the more likely people get confused or say, what did you just say? So be concise as well. I guess we have a little bit more time here. We'll go through maybe one or two more here. When your organization is hiring an analyst, does it use analytics business case questions? So first option, no, we mainly use behavioral questions. And if you're not familiar with the term behavioral questions, questions like, tell me about a time you faced a conflict. How did you handle that? Or maybe, and this gets to maybe the second option here, tell me about an analysis that you've done in the past. Very open-ended. The problem I have with these is they're expected, they can be very rehearsed, and they don't really address whether that person can do the job or not necessarily, because they can be so rehearsed. They can be coached on how to answer these very common behavioral interview questions. Even when you ask them about an analysis they've done, you want to assume the best from candidates, but it is possible that somebody just made something up or talked with another analyst about a project that another analyst did. Right? So here, I feel like you can get a much better read if you just present a real scenario or a similar scenario to what a person in this role would be faced with. Maybe it's a SQL challenge, maybe it's a Power BI challenge, a Python challenge. It may not have to do with a tool at all, because usually if they know one tool, they can learn another tool in that bucket. If they know Tableau, they can learn Power BI easily most of the time. Likely with advanced analytics tools like SAS, R, or Python, if they know one, they can usually learn the others. So you don't necessarily want to get too tool specific, although you can ask them about the tools they've used in the past and say, okay, what code would you write in that tool? But what I'd really recommend is focusing on the methodology. Okay, we've got this business challenge. A stakeholder asks you to perform an analysis on it. How do you create that analysis? And then they're talking about, I'd create this data set, I'd control for this, I'd look into this, I'd visualize it this way. And you want to keep an open mind. You should have thought about, okay, what would be a robust way to address this? And sometimes there's an obvious answer, but you want to keep an open mind. And if someone comes up with a solution that you wouldn't have thought of, and you think about it, and you think, yeah, that would actually work, and that's a very robust methodology. Man, that's a great candidate, because not only did they come up with a robust solution, but they came up with one that you wouldn't have thought of. So they're going to bring something to the table. They're not just going to be someone who can execute like you would execute, but bring some new ideas and robust ideas. Now, if they come up with a methodology, or they can't even come up with any methodology, or they come up with a methodology and you think about it and you're like, that's not really robust. And you might ask some prodding questions like, okay, but how would you handle this situation? You might have to prod them a little bit, and that's not as ideal. You want a candidate who can do a pretty good job from the very get-go. But if you'd have to do some prodding and they're able to eventually get there, that might be okay as well. But you want someone who comes up with a robust approach. If they come up with an approach that has a lot of holes in it, and you're trying to give it a chance, but you really think about it, just wouldn't work. And again, you're asking the follow-up questions, they're still not able to refine that approach and make it robust, make it rigorous, then that's a detractor from an interview perspective. But I highly recommend asking questions on the spot, case questions, see what they can come up with. And I think that's a really good way to assess candidates. There's a lot of things to think about when you're interviewing, but I highly recommend using business case scenario questions. And I think you're going to get some really talented analysts that way in general. Well, I think that's the hour for us. Thank you to everyone who attended today. If you're watching this recording, thanks for checking out the recording. Please consider coming to a future session. We do these every Friday, 10 Eastern. Sometimes they're rescheduled, but it's just a time to answer your questions. Tiffany, thanks for bringing a really great SQL question. We got to talk about a lot of things through that, even beyond SQL. And if anyone else has questions in the future, Tiffany, if you have more questions, please come to these meetings. That's what it's for. If you have soft skill questions, questions about how to build your career, I'm here to answer those as well. Been in the industry for 13 years across the analytics industry, across different areas, and would just love to help you. So consider coming. I try to, if it does need to be rescheduled, follow on social media. I usually give a heads up of at least a couple days if the office hours are going to be rescheduled that week. It's just a great time to answer your questions and go through some prepared topics if we have time, like we did at the end here, analytics maturity. Thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you next week.